Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails. It's a real honor today to have friend and amazing entrepreneur Cherie White with us today. Cherie is the CEO of Think for the Future, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a mentorship juggernaut of a social enterprise that she founded in Nottingham in 2012 and now serving, I'm guessing, more than 10,000 students. She may tell me it's double that these days, annually all around the UK. TFTF uses a data-driven approach with mentors on the ground tackling social and emotional barriers to learning in UK schools. Having grown up on a council estate in southeast London, Cherie got started on her social impact journey very early and has shown that building a robust social enterprise doesn't have to rely on grants or donations. A huge thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
This is a cool one because we know each other quite well already. I'm really excited to hear a bit more of the personal story though. So we're both obsessed with mentoring, which is nice. I usually have to say I'm obsessed with mentoring and the other person to a lesser degree, but we're both obsessed with mentoring. Who's your mentor? Did you have a mentor? Perspectives on mentoring from an early start?
Yeah, I had, when I saw this question, I was thinking, have I had a mentor? And yes, I have. I've had many different types of mentors over the years. I think the one person, I won't name him, but the one person that I think really kick-started genuinely where I can say I wouldn't be here without the mentorship of that person. It was sort of back when I was a university student, and I Think the Future was in its very, early days. It was very young and inexperienced. And I think he was someone that piqued my interest in trying to understand how do you build a impactful, sustainable social enterprise that can sort of wash its own face and, cover its own costs and be sustainable, 100 years down the line. And I think that a lot of the work around impact and are you doing something that genuinely is, improving society, it's improving how things are done, and how do you link that with a financially sustainable model. That a lot of that work that I did with him was really eye-opening, and I wouldn't be here without a lot of that work in the early days. And I think a lot how we've built Think for the Future is sort of a testament to a lot of that thinking. And yeah, I would say that individual has definitely been very key in shaping sort of my mindset.
So more like a business mentor, really, in a sense that there's like a lot around the mindset of what you've structured. And I guess your growing up has been the organization in itself, right? Because you started it so young. What about when you were at school? Do you think you had a perception of what mentoring was then? Was it something you understood as a student?
Yeah, I was part of a small mentoring program, like peer mentoring, sort of when I was in year 11. It wasn't necessarily, at school and at university who said, right, we're going to set up a mentoring program. That mentoring provision was very school led in terms of schools, later on saying, we could do with X, Y, and Z being created. So it wasn't necessarily, I didn't go into it knowing we were setting up a mentoring provision, if that makes sense. But yeah, definitely mentoring's formed quite a large part of my life. Thinking back to school, as well as university.
Amazing. And if we take you back to school, any anecdotes for us from your time at school? Maybe they tell us something about you now.
I was thinking about this. So yeah, probably. I think speaking to my old head teacher, so I know my old head teacher very well. He's head teacher of a school in central London, and he jokes about this all the time with me and what I was like at school. So I was pretty disengaged in school. My school wasn't fantastic back then. Outcomes, it was in a really challenging part of London, the challenging demographic. It was a brand new school, so we were like the first year. So that had its challenges as well. But when I got to year 10 or 11, I started to panic that, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be doing anything meaningful when I'm older. And I had this fear that I'd really been wasting the last couple of years. So then I had it in my head to be the only way for me to be successful or to do something when I'm older that I enjoy and love would be to be head girl. And that obsession was big. It was a big obsession. You ask all family members, they know Cherie was trying to be head girl. So I spent years doing everything and anything to be in everyone's good books and helping out on parents' evenings. So when the day finally come about them picking head girl, I didn't get it, and I didn't get deputy, and it was like a life ruining moment for me that looking back on is now very funny. But I was genuinely really concerned. If I didn't get head girl, I'm not going to get into a good university. My life's over. And he reminds me of that daily whenever I have calls with him. He remembers how traumatic it was for me, and he said, Cherie, I think that's a big part of building your resilience. I think you not getting head girl is a big driver for you. So, and actually, I think it was, because when you're a teenager, everything's really dramatic, isn't it? And
I mean, you got the last laugh, right? You're running your own organization now, much more important than being head girl. But
yeah, there's still something about it though. He's bought me head girl pins. I have about 6 head girl pins from people in my life who know this story have bought me head girl pins, but I still don't think it compares. But yeah, I think it was quite funny.
Well, one for another life. And I guess since that tough, resilient moment, there's probably been some harder ones as well.
Yes.
You've been at it with TFTF for 14 years. Which is amazing in itself as like a career journey for someone still so young. Tough moments. Have there been any really standout toughest moments of that, or times where things looked a little bleaker than perhaps they do now?
I think it's always when we've entered our next phase of scale. So just for context, we have around about 100 people who work full time at Think for the Future. So we're at a pretty decent size. I think it's always when we've been going through phases of growth and change are always the most challenging. Right in the early days, I think the toughest moments are when you really don't have a solid idea what you're doing as an organization. You're sort of, we're very school led, and our service has been built sort of by our schools and what they need, which has been fantastic. And I think in the early days where you're not 100% sure on, how are you going to survive? How are you going to grow? How are you going to be able to pay people? That's always the toughest moment, when you're not as clear on your own vision. As soon as you have that clarity, I think it changes. For me, if I have a problem, I'm not necessarily stressed about the problem. I'm more stressed that I can't see the solution. As soon as I see the solution and I know how we'll solve that problem, all my anxiety and sort of stress related to that problem disappears. I'm very sort of visual in how I work, and I always like to be thinking, and this is no pun intended, but thinking for the future. And that relieves a lot of stress and anxiety for me, knowing what our next steps are in absolute detail. So if there's ever a grey moment, or I think, how are we going to solve that? So yeah, I think early days definitely very stressful. I think now, as the team's getting bigger, we're going through a lot of change. That can always bring sort of stress and anxiety. And yeah, but no sort of standout moment that sort of.
You never seem very stressed to me. I mean, I think there's a kind of there's a standard quality for people running their own organizations that has to be a kind of blasé optimism in the face of problems and challenges, and a sense of calm to steer the ship and feel that as long as there is a solution on the horizon, it'll be found. But I think it's a good reminder that sometimes there are those moments where perhaps the solution isn't clear, and that sense of purgatory or being in the middle of nothing is what's complicated. What about a best moment? Has there been one moment where you just went, yes, that was an absolute a gem? Or if there've obviously been lots, but I'm sure there's one that stands out.
Been lots. I think the common theme of those moments is sort of driven by our schools and young people, for when we see impact in that young person. We have a school who's telling us that this service is exactly what the school need. It's creating impact. It's solving a problem for them. I think those moments where it really confirms the model and confirms all the hard work that's going into it are those best moments. We also run inclusion centres in schools. That's a growing provision of ours, and hearing schools' feedback and how it is, vitally important for those students who do struggle within mainstream. I think all of those sort of validation of what you're doing and that validation of impact for me are our best moments. I'd never want to set anything up that is token and is just an added stress on a budget. And it's, we always need to be seeking confirmation of impact. So they're our kind of best moments. So not one individually, but that's the common theme.
It must be fun getting sort of back into the weeds as well, or being at the coalface when you're in a school and you can see the impact directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about content? We have a lot of people here who'll be keen to know what it is you read or watch or listen to. Anything you'd like to share that's been particularly inspiring of late? It doesn't have to be self-help. It could be fiction if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm not someone that reads self-help books or listens to anything like that. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think this is going to be too profound. I think my switch off that I find educational and there is a lot of learning I take from this podcast series is Free Economics podcast. It's very popular. Lots of people listen to it. I find it really useful because of the sort of scientific approach it has to things like leadership and things like problems. In businesses, it's very matter of fact. It's it's quite scientific and practical in its approach, and I quite appreciate that. Sometimes it's quite nice to hear advice delivered from a scientific, practical format. So that's normally what I typically lean towards. So yeah, my recommendation would be that podcast series.
I feel like so many of us now want to digest things by podcast because we can listen to them traveling in the car, walking in, whatever we're doing. I struggle on the reading too, and if I start a self-help book, I'm probably falling asleep within 10 minutes. But I would say that's more, Free Economics is more self-helpy than I thought you were going to say. I shut off with completely random stuff that's so far removed from education. It just feels, it's like being on a desert island for 20 minutes or whatever. But I'm with you. I think it's great. Free Economics. I'm going to start that. Thank you.
I'm obsessed.
Schools, the educational landscape, politics, it's rife with lots of divided opinions and different ways to look at things, educationally or otherwise. Is there maybe an unpopular or controversial opinion you're happy to share that kind of stands out from your experience today?
I think my big one, and you touched upon it in sort of the introduction, I'm a big believer in making sure that impacts and provisions and delivery of service can fit within a budget, and how us as an organisation, we strive to be budget friendly. Our Inclusion Centre provision strives to save cost, and how do we not add to the pressures? And I think there's a big reason why us as an organisation, we've turned down hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of grant funding, and literally someone offered us about £250,000 a year for 5 years, and we said no, quite easily said no. And I know that is unusual and quite shocking. I'm a big believer, we have to be really sustainable in how we grow and how we build as an organisation, and we need the financial pressure. We need to make sure that our customers stay with us, our schools, they pay for our service. We need to make sure we're priced correctly in their budget. We need to also then make sure we can fund ourselves and create meaningful employment for everyone, and all those pound signs need to balance, and that's quite challenging. However, I think in the landscape that we're working within, and school funding being squeezed, it's how can we be innovative in approaches to funding? Because I'm a big believer that I really don't think money solves problems. I don't think having more money correlates to a better service for young people and a better schools, better education for young people. Obviously, there's a line in that where you can go too far below, and it absolutely erodes the quality of education for a young person. However, I do think that it doesn't necessarily mean that provisions and outcomes for students are better because there's more money. And I know that's a bit controversial because
but I'm totally with you. I think it's quite rare to see and speak to someone who's happy to sort of talk about working in the sector on a business model. I know you're a social enterprise, but it's,
Yeah.
social enterprise, business, charity, all these things. I feel there's been this sense of like, are you a goodie or a baddie in serving schools? Like, what kind of an education organization are you? Are you a ed tech kind of, we're there to make profit and grow and be part of the VC landscape, or are we there to be a charity and just do good? And I think it's actually there's a middle ground where things need to be run as commercial operations to pay people, whether or not the money is philanthropic, or whether people are reporting to the Charities Commission or Companies House. What's your take on that landscape? Has that frustrated you? Have you found like barriers to that in working with teachers and educators?
Actually, no. I think when we are open about our model, and sometimes there's not many opportunity for me to sit with leaders in schools and say, oh, this is how we're funded, because I think a lot of people assume that we get loads of money from the government or we get loads of money from funders. And the people where I've actually, I was in a meeting with CEO a few months ago, and I think he was just alluding to the fact that we receive funding, and I said, oh no, like our only funding model is the contracts that we hold with individual schools, and it was really, really respected. So with leaders who I share that with, it is definitely respected. And I think for context, we don't pay, there's no dividends or there's no profit share. Any surplus we make is reinvested into our organisation. We spend a lot here, so we don't always have lots of surplus, and we reinvest it straight back into the organisation. And I think we have to have financial pressure, and I'm a big believer. I can handle financial pressure very well. If we all of a sudden lose 40% of our schools because they're not satisfied with our service, we have to feel the knock-on effect of that as an organisation. We need to be the quality of what we deliver to our young people, the impact that we deliver to our young people has to be directly tied to our funding model, because otherwise, if they're separated, sometimes your quality starts to kind of go all the way over here, yet your funding stream stays constant. And that's we have to feel the pulls and the tugs and the stresses of the quality of our delivery of service, which is the impact that we create. And so those being kind of completely married is how we should operate as an organisation. So it's a healthy pressure.
Healthy pressure, I like that. And I guess you're still, like any organisation in any market, you're tied to the ups and downs of that market and the people you're serving. Difficult landscape for schools and education more broadly, like every public sector.
Yeah.
Funding, and we heard about it in the budget just yesterday, Wednesday the 6th of March. Any thoughts on what you hope to see for the future in an education landscape, not just for you guys at TFTF, but more broadly?
I think I'm not going to sit and say schools should get X more money. I don't lead a school, so the ins and outs of a school's budget, I'm not completely qualified to discuss. I think that the government need to acknowledge how much money is required to run a school that delivers high quality sort of educational outcomes for young people. Where is that kind of bottom line, where going below that really erodes the quality of education, but also what other support is needed to be given to schools to provide efficiencies within budget, because there are more issues in schools and some schools that we work in that like I said, money wouldn't solve. It could be quality of recruitment, quality of getting fantastic teachers into education. There's lots and lots of other problems that I see that a lot of money doesn't necessarily solve. So I hope that it's a two-pronged approach of making sure there's an understanding of what is the range that a school should be operating in, financially, to deliver a high quality education, particularly in challenging areas. But then has to be other support mechanisms where we are supporting the sector in other ways. Like I said, there are a lot of other ways. I think that there can be support, money can be funneled too.
Well put. I think we're basically out of time, amazingly, already. But I've got one more quick question for you, which is, anyone approaching a career in this sector, what's your piece of advice for them? Anything you would wish you'd known at the start of your journey that you can pass on to those in a fresher position?
It's a very good question. I think particularly for sort of Gen Z, Gen Z, and or whatever the names are, I think it's being able to be resilient, and I do think resilience is a little bit of a muscle, and is one that you can train over time. And I think I've been very quick to be offended or be stressed at a circumstance, and as I've got older, I've become a lot more laid back. I'm sort of used to be one of those people that's maybe very quick to complain, and I think that's definitely a Gen Z trait. I think it's relaxing, being more resilient to stressful situations, and training that resilience muscle.
I love that. It's like almost like to be more cool and calm, but to have a thicker skin, maybe.
Yeah.
That's what I'm picking up a bit from that.
Yeah. I think that's the balance.
And certainly if you're going to work in any organization, whether it's a school or separate to schools, that is facing challenges and which requires that like chameleon approach to be different and flexible all the time and adaptable. Yeah.
Challenges should be welcomed.
Exactly. Be grateful for them. Cherie, I am very grateful that you've spent 20 minutes with me today. It's been a real pleasure. I feel like we could have hours on this, and you have a hugely inspiring career for anyone interested in supporting young people in social impact or in or out of schools. So I think it will be a real resource for people listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.